I pulled a double shift on my anniversary and came home to an empty garage. My mom tossed me the keys to my sister's new car and said, "We sold yours." She offered a head start. Then she smirked. "Oh, and you'll be paying her tuition too. $5,000 by Friday." I just nodded, packed my stuff, left without a word. But before I closed the door, I dropped off one folder. This morning, my phone exploded. My aunt's threatening a lawsuit, my cousin's screaming, and mom's trying to clarify it all to everyone. I, 32M, thought my biggest problem that Tuesday was surviving another double shift at the warehouse. It was my 5th wedding anniversary, and I'd promised my wife I'd be home by 8 with takeout from that Italian place she loves. Instead, I was pulling overtime because 3 guys called in sick and management was breathing down everyone's necks about the quarterly numbers. The drive home felt endless. My back ached from loading trucks for 14 hours straight, and all I wanted was to collapse on the couch with my wife, maybe watch something mindless on Netflix. The house looked dark when I pulled into the driveway, which struck me as odd. My wife's car wasn't there, but sometimes she visited her sister on weeknights. Walking toward the front door, I noticed the garage door was slightly ajar. I pressed the button on my keychain to open it fully, planning to park inside like always. The garage door rolled up to reveal absolutely nothing. Empty concrete floor. Oil stains where my 2019 Honda Civic used to sit. I stood there for a full minute, thinking maybe I was hallucinating from exhaustion. My mother opened the front door before I could even knock. She had this weird expression on her face, somewhere between guilty and defiant. Without any preamble, she tossed me a set of keys. I caught them instinctively, staring down at the unfamiliar keychain shaped like a graduation cap. Mom explained that they'd sold my car. Just like that. My sister had made them an offer they couldn't refuse, she said, and since my sister was starting her master's program in the fall, she needed reliable transportation. The keys in my hand belonged to my sister's old beater, a 2008 Toyota with over 200,000 miles on it. I asked where my wife was. Mom said she'd gone to stay with her parents for a few days, that there had been some kind of misunderstanding about the car situation. The way she said it made my stomach drop. My wife had been in on this somehow. Then came the real punch to the gut. Mom informed me that since my sister was family and had helped them out of a financial bind by buying my car, I'd be contributing to her education costs. $5,000 by Friday. She said it like she was asking me to pick up milk from the store. I must have looked stunned because Mom's expression shifted to that smirk I remembered from childhood, the one that appeared whenever she'd successfully manipulated a situation to benefit my sister. She reminded me that family comes first, that my sister had always been the academic one, that my blue-collar job was stable enough to handle a little sacrifice. Something inside me went very quiet. I nodded slowly, telling her I understood. She seemed relieved, probably expecting the usual argument or pleading that had characterized my responses to family drama over the years. Instead, I asked if I could go upstairs and pack some clothes. Mom seemed surprised but agreed. I climbed the stairs to the room that had been mine before I got married, the one I'd been staying in since moving back in with my parents 6 months ago after my wife and I hit a rough patch financially. Every step felt mechanical, like I was watching someone else's life from the outside. I packed methodically. Clothes, toiletries, important documents, the few personal items that mattered. It took maybe 20 minutes. My movements felt calm, almost meditative. Mom had gone back to the living room and was watching television, the volume turned up loud enough that she probably couldn't hear me moving around upstairs. Before heading down, I went to my old desk and pulled out a manila folder I'd been keeping in the bottom drawer. Inside were documents I discovered 3 months ago when helping my parents organize their financial paperwork for tax season. Documents that painted a very different picture of our family's money situation than what I'd been told. I tucked the folder under my arm and headed downstairs. Mom was absorbed in some reality show, barely glancing up when I walked through the living room with my duffel bag. I told her I was going to stay at a friend's place for a few days while I figured out how to get the tuition money together. She nodded distractedly, making some comment about how responsible I was being about the whole situation. I agreed that yes, I was definitely going to handle this responsibly. At the front door, I paused. Mom was still watching television, laughing at something on screen. I placed the manila folder on the small table by the door, the one where they always kept mail and keys. I didn't say anything about it, just set it down and walked out. The drive to my buddy's apartment felt surreal. My sister's old car wheezed and rattled, the check engine light glowing like an accusatory eye on the dashboard. Every red light gave me time to think about what I'd just done, and honestly, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a weird sense of completion. I'd been carrying those documents around for months, trying to figure out what to do with the information they contained. Now it seemed obvious. Sometimes the truth just needs the right moment to surface. My friend wasn't home, but he'd given me a spare key months ago. I let myself in, dropped my bag in the guest room, and tried to sleep. It took hours. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing Mom smirk, hearing her casual demand for $5,000, remembering the empty garage. Update 1. I woke up Wednesday morning to my phone buzzing like an angry wasp. 17 missed calls. 43 text messages. The notifications kept coming as I sat there staring at the screen. The first few calls were from my sister. Her voicemails started confused and quickly escalated to frantic. She wanted to know what the hell I thought I was doing, why I was trying to destroy the family, whether I'd lost my mind. The desperation in her voice told me she'd found the folder. Mom had left 8 voicemails. The progression was fascinating in a sick way. The first one was angry, demanding I come home immediately to explain myself. By the 4th, she was trying to sound reasonable, suggesting we could work out some kind of arrangement. The 8th one was pure panic, begging me to call her back so we could figure this out together. But the calls that really got my attention were from my aunt and cousin. See, the documents in that folder weren't just about my immediate family's finances. They painted a much bigger picture, one that implicated several family members in what could generously be called financial impropriety. My aunt was threatening legal action, claiming I was spreading malicious lies designed to hurt the family's reputation. Her son, my cousin, left a voicemail that was mostly incoherent, screaming about betrayal and lawsuits and how dare I drag his name into this mess. The beautiful thing was, I hadn't dragged anyone into anything. I'd simply left copies of official documents where certain people would find them. Documents that showed how my college fund had been borrowed to help my sister buy her first car. How the money I'd been contributing to household expenses for the past 6 months had been funneled directly into an account for my sister's graduate school. How my aunt had been skimming from my grandmother's estate, with my mother's knowledge and cooperation. Most interesting of all were the bank statements showing that my car hadn't been sold to help anyone. It had been sold to pay for my cousin's gambling debts, with my sister getting the cash as payment for facilitating the whole scheme. The beater car I was now driving? That had been sitting in a used car lot for 3 months because no one wanted it. I didn't return any of the calls. Instead, I forwarded several of the more threatening voicemails to my email account, creating a nice digital trail of their panic. Then I went to work like it was any other day. My supervisor asked why I looked so relaxed after pulling that brutal double shift. I told him I'd finally figured out how to solve a problem that had been bothering me for months. He laughed and said whatever I'd done, I should bottle it and sell it because I looked like a new man. He wasn't wrong. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I could breathe properly. Update 2. By Thursday evening, the situation had escalated beautifully. My phone had given up buzzing and just stayed permanently lit with notifications. I'd started answering calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and half of them were other family members who'd apparently been brought into the loop. My grandmother called. She was 91 and sharp as a tack, and she wanted to know if what she'd heard about her estate was true. I confirmed that yes, based on the documents I'd found. Approximately $15,000 had been redirected from her accounts over the past 2 years. She thanked me politely and hung up. 2 hours later, my aunt called back. This time she wasn't threatening lawsuits. She was crying, begging me to consider the damage I was doing to the family, asking what it would take to make this go away. I told her I wasn't trying to make anything happen. I'd simply shared some documents that had been weighing on my conscience. The most interesting call came from my sister. She'd apparently sobered up from her initial panic and was now trying a different approach. She wanted to meet for coffee to discuss how we could resolve this situation like adults. She emphasized that word, adults, like it carried some special meaning. I agreed to meet her Friday morning at a neutral location, a diner near the warehouse where I worked. She sounded relieved, probably thinking she could talk her way out of this mess like she'd talked her way out of everything else since we were kids. That night, my friend came home and found me organizing documents at his kitchen table. He asked what I was doing, and I explained the whole situation. He just nodded and said it sounded like I was finally standing up for myself. Then he offered to come with me to the meeting with my sister, just in case things got heated. I declined. This was something I needed to handle alone. Friday morning arrived gray and rainy, which felt appropriately dramatic. I got to the diner early and ordered coffee, black. My sister arrived 15 minutes late, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her usual perfect appearance was cracked around the edges, hair not quite as styled as usual, makeup not quite covering the dark circles under her eyes. She slid into the booth across from me and immediately launched into what I recognized as her standard manipulation playbook. First came the hurt sister routine, asking how I could do this to family, reminding me of all the times she'd been there for me growing up. When that didn't seem to be working, she shifted to practical concerns, explaining how this could hurt everyone's financial stability, including mine. I let her talk for about 10 minutes, occasionally nodding or making neutral sounds. She seemed encouraged by my apparent receptiveness, leaning forward and speaking more earnestly about family loyalty and working together to solve problems. Finally, she got to what I knew was her real agenda. She offered to give me back my car if I would just retrieve those documents and promise not to share any more family information with outside parties. She even offered to forget about the tuition money, presenting it like she was making a huge sacrifice for the sake of family harmony. I took a sip of my coffee and asked her one simple question. Did she really think I was stupid enough to believe that she'd bought my car as some kind of favor to me? The mask slipped. For just a moment, I saw the calculation behind her eyes, the rapid assessment of how much she could safely admit versus how much she needed to continue denying. She'd underestimated me for so long that she couldn't quite adjust to the idea that I might actually know what was going on. She tried to recover, claiming there had been some misunderstanding, that the financial arrangements were more complicated than they appeared. I told her I was sure they were very complicated, and that's exactly why I thought other people should have the chance to examine them closely. That's when she finally dropped the act entirely. She leaned back in the booth and asked what I wanted. Not what would make me happy or what would repair our relationship, but what I wanted in exchange for my silence. I finished my coffee and stood up to leave. I told her I didn't want anything from her or anyone else. I'd spent months carrying around information that made me sick to my stomach, and now I didn't have to carry it anymore. That was all I'd wanted. She called after me as I walked toward the door, her voice rising enough that other customers turned to look. She said I was making a mistake, that I was destroying my own family over money that didn't even matter in the long run. I paused at the door and turned back. I told her she was right about one thing. It wasn't about the money. It was about the fact that she'd all thought I was too stupid or too weak to ever figure out what they'd been doing to me. Then I left. Update 3. The weekend was surprisingly quiet. My phone had finally stopped buzzing constantly, settling into an occasional call or text that I mostly ignored. I spent Saturday helping my friend fix his motorcycle and Sunday doing absolutely nothing productive. It felt like the first real rest I'd had in months. Monday morning brought a new development. My wife called for the first time since I'd found the empty garage. Her voice was carefully neutral as she asked if we could talk in person. She suggested meeting at the park where we'd had our first date, which felt like either a manipulative callback to better times or a genuinely sentimental gesture. With her, it was always hard to tell. I agreed to meet her that evening after work. She was already there when I arrived, sitting on the same bench where we'd shared takeout pizza 5 years ago. She looked tired but put together, like she'd spent time preparing for this conversation. She started by apologizing for disappearing without explanation. She said she'd gotten scared when the car thing happened, that she hadn't known how I'd react, and thought it might be better to give everyone space to cool down. I asked if she'd known they were planning to sell my car. The pause before her answer told me everything I needed to know. She admitted that Mom had mentioned they were having financial problems and that my sister needed reliable transportation for school. She claimed she hadn't realized they were planning to just take my car without asking, that she'd thought they were going to present it as a family discussion where we'd all figure out the best solution together. I asked if she'd known about the tuition demand. Another pause. She said Mom had mentioned that the family was hoping everyone could pitch in to help with educational expenses, but she hadn't known they were going to spring a specific dollar amount and deadline on me. She was telling the truth, mostly, but it was truth filtered through willful ignorance. She'd known something was happening and had chosen not to dig deeper because she didn't want to be responsible for the messy details. Then she asked about the documents I'd supposedly left behind. She said Mom was claiming I'd fabricated financial records to make the family look bad, but other people were saying the documents were real and showed serious problems. She wanted to know which version was true. I told her the documents were absolutely real and that I discovered them while helping organize paperwork for tax season. I explained how I'd been quietly contributing to household expenses for months while my sister and cousin had been draining money from family accounts. I told her about my college fund, about the grandmother's estate, about the real reason my car had been sold. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled as I talked. When I finished, she asked why I hadn't told her about any of this when I first discovered it. That was a fair question. I admitted I hadn't known how to handle it, that I'd hoped maybe there was some explanation I wasn't seeing. I'd also been afraid that bringing it up would just create more family drama without actually solving anything. She pointed out that dropping off those documents had certainly created family drama. I agreed, but said at least now the drama was based on truth instead of everyone pretending problems didn't exist. We sat in silence for a few minutes, watching dogs chase frisbees and kids play on the playground equipment. Finally, she asked what I wanted to do about our marriage. I told her honestly that I didn't know. I said I understood why she'd gotten scared and removed herself from the situation, but I was hurt that she'd chosen to protect herself instead of standing with me when things got difficult. I admitted that discovering how my family had been treating me had made me question a lot of things, including whether I'd been too passive in other areas of my life. She asked if I thought we could work through it. I said maybe, but it would require both of us being more honest about difficult things instead of just hoping problems would resolve themselves. She nodded and said she'd been thinking the same thing. She asked if I wanted to try couples counseling, and I said yes. As we were getting ready to leave, she asked one more question. Did I regret leaving those documents where the family would find them? I thought about it for a moment. The past week had been exhausting and painful, but also clarifying in a way I hadn't expected. I told her I regretted that it had come to that, but I didn't regret that the truth was finally out in the open. She said she could understand that, and maybe it was better this way, even if it was messy and complicated. Walking back to our cars, I realized that for the first time in months, I felt like I was having a real conversation with my wife instead of just managing around unspoken problems. It wasn't perfect, and we had a lot of work ahead of us, but it felt like a start. The rest of my family was still sending occasional angry texts and leaving voicemails that ranged from pleading to threatening. My grandmother had apparently hired a lawyer to look into the estate situation. My sister had moved back in with my parents and was, according to mutual friends, going through a really hard time. But honestly, none of that was my problem anymore. I'd carried their secrets long enough, and now they could figure out how to carry the consequences themselves. I was finally focused on my own life for once, and it felt like exactly the right place to start.